From the land grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 8th day of April 2025. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk with Naomi Blohm from TotalFarmMarketing.com. Preza Pontes, Extension agronomist here on campus at the Giovani, will help us explore early season planting dates and the impact of cold, wet weather on seedlings. And then we'll turn our attention to the weather forecast with Don Day. He's at Day Weather in Cheyenne, Wyoming, all on this Tuesday edition of the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media. It's public radio, online on demand at WILLAG.org.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
May corn today settled at $4.69. That was up 4.5. December a quarter lower at $4.45 3/4. New beans at $9.77 3/4 down 3 1/4 in the November. And wheat futures were up 3.5 at $5.54. Naomi Blohm from TotalFarmMarketing.com out of West Bend, Wisconsin, now joins us. Hi, Naomi. Thanks for being with us again today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the tariff situation. It can be confusing, but let's deal with just soybeans that are going to China. If the Chinese and the U.S. government do not come to some solution, beginning on April 10th, which is Thursday, same day as the World Ag Supply and Demand Estimate, which could be interesting to watch, the export figures on that day, Chinese imports of U.S. soybeans will be taxed at a 34% level going in, or 44% level going into that nation. It would make them fairly expensive across the board, and we still have a lot of soybeans to ship from this year. What concerns you about all of the trade information that is now floating around?
Well, two parts. One is the confusion that just continues to transpire every day between what's actually happening and what isn't happening. But then, of course, the bigger picture would be the fear of cancellations, potentially of bean sales that are on the books. My understanding from what I read today, as of March 27th, there were about 600,000 tons of China's 2024-25 bean commitments that were unshipped. So could we see cancellations of old crop? But of course, I think the bigger concern going forward would be for new crop sales. In a way, part of me wonders how much of that the market is absorbing or expecting as far as a potential decline in exports going forward, how much of that could be priced into the marketplace. But it's just another wrinkle in this whole situation to create uncertainty. Markets, of course, don't like uncertainty, and it could just put the bean market at risk of further price decline on the uncertainty.
In the USDA World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate report, the agency did give us a heads up that it did not include any tariffs because they weren't in place, but that in future reports, if they were in place, they would. I suppose they're probably already running their numbers, but it would be a scramble on Thursday morning when the WASDE report is due out at 11 o'clock, and we'll have to pay attention to whether things are in place or not and what it does to the exports for the United States, both old and new crop.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on the report for Thursday, right now traders not really looking for too many changes to ending stocks from the March number. March soybean ending stocks were at 380 million bushels, the average trade estimate 379. So I think that's traders' way of saying, we don't know what's going to transpire, so we'll just kind of keep our guess unchanged and see what actually can happen between potential loss of export demand and if the USDA accounts for that on the 24-25 crop year. And then, of course, it'll take the May report before we get the new crop information, but that's what's on the traders' minds right now, and we'll see what that report has to say Thursday at 11.
Yeah, I had realized when I said both, I knew immediately that I was wrong,
okay.
that it will be not until May that we get a set of USDA numbers for the new crop. Corn, turn your attention there. It seems to have been really unbothered a lot about all of the tariff talk. Where do we stand today?
So I really am optimistic yet with old crop values. May corn up 4.5 cents today. July corn up 4 cents. those old crop contracts knocking on the door of technical overhead resistance, the 475 area for July, the 100-day moving average, just needs some friendly news to get it to go through resistance levels. The swing objective higher points to a 20 to 25 cent breakout, meaning that the July corn contract, if we get friendly news on Thursday, could be back up near the $5 value. And so what I'm wondering, trade expectations for Thursday's report coming in a little bit lower than the last month's number. March ending stocks at 1.54 billion bushels, average trade guess at 1.51. Of course, a lot of the people in the industry thinking that the number could be a little smaller because export demand actually has been fantastic. Ethanol demand great, but of course the uncertainty regarding feed demand for livestock in question. If we can get a friendly number on that report, we're going to see the spreads between old crop and new crop, I think, really start to come into play. I'm really friendly with May and July corn. But then we'll have to keep an eye on reality with 5 million acres getting planted down the road. So that kind of takes some of the excitement out of the marketplace. But hey, for the short term, it'll be helpful for any farmers who have any grain yet to price.
And lastly, because you mentioned livestock, the cattle have not performed well. What worries do you have?
Well, there's a couple things. So we're seeing the funds starting to exit that marketplace and take some profits. The June contract for live cattle futures testing the uptrending line that has been established since September. So this is a major support area that we're coming to. We're wanting to see how the consumer demand fares in light of the stock market falling apart. Are consumers going to start to feel not as optimistic about the economy? Are they going to start to just kind of hunker down on their spending and going out to eat? So that's what we're going to be watching going forward, keeping an eye on cash market values, because if that long-term uptrend line support fails, that's just going to trigger more technical selling, which would be a cue for those fund traders to pitch and exit and dump those long positions that they have on live cattle futures and feeder cattle futures. So we got to be watching that.
We'll talk to you Thursday afternoon for Commodity Week. Thanks for doing that show, too.
Thank you.
That is Naomi Blohm. She is with TotalFarmMarketing.com. You're listening to the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media. Our theme music is written, performed, produced, and courtesy of Logan County, Illinois farmer Tim Gleason. Yesterday afternoon, the United States Department of Agriculture released the first weekly crop progress report of the season. It shows 2% of the corn crop around the nation has been planted. The rolling 5-year average is also 2%. We're led by Texas. It is 59% planted. Now, here are the statisticians from across the Midwest with updates from their regions.
This is Melissa Couch, agricultural statistician for the USDA NASS Iowa Field Office. Minimal field work was done during the week, but some producers were able to plant oats, apply anhydrous, and dry fertilizer. Topsoil moisture condition rate is 6% very short, 22% short, 68% adequate, and 4% surplus. Subsoil moisture condition rated 10% very short, 34% short, 55% adequate, and 1% surplus. Oats seeding reached 20% complete, 8 days behind last year, but 2 days ahead of the 5-year average. Oats emerged to reach 2%. Calving was in full swing with reports of mud in some areas. And that's this week's report of crop progress and conditions across the state of Iowa. For the USDA NASS Upper Midwest Regional Field Office, this is Melissa Couch.
Hello everyone, this is Brad Summa, Director of the USDA NASS Heartland Region, and this is the Illinois Crop Progress and Condition Report for the week ending Sunday, April 6th. Things are off to kind of a slow start due to the cooler temperatures and recent rains we've had, but I'm sure things will pick up quickly. Statewide, the average temperature was 47.2 degrees, which was 0.1 degrees below normal. The precipitation average across the state was 3.39 inches, which was 2.71 inches above normal. Topsoil moisture supply is now rated at 1% very short, 11% short, 54% adequate, and 34% surplus. Subsoil moisture supply was rated at 1% very short, 31% short, 45% adequate, and 23% surplus. Soybeans planted has reached 1%, just getting started out there, and no progress to speak of for corn just yet. The winter wheat condition was rated 2% very poor, 35% fair, 55% good, and 8% excellent. For our Illinois cattlemen, the pasture condition was rated 6% very poor, 16% poor, 35% fair, 32% good, and 11% excellent. Again, this is Brad Summer. I look forward to updating you next week at this time, and I hope you have a great week.
Dan Loftus, Minnesota State Statistician for the USDA NASS Minnesota Field Office. Widespread rain and record snowfall in some areas limited Minnesota farmers to 1.0 days suitable for fieldwork during the week. Field activities where feasible included fertilizer and manure applications and tillage. Livestock were doing well with calving continuing. Topsoil moisture supplies rated 4% very short, 28% short, 58% adequate, and 10% surplus. Subsoil moisture supplies rated 6% very short, 43% short, 47% adequate, and 4% surplus. Oats planted was at 2% complete, about 2 weeks behind last year and 2 days behind the 5-year average. For the USDA NASS Minnesota Field Office, this is Dan Loftus.
I am Nathaniel Warnsky with USDA NASS. This week, Indiana topsoil moisture rated 89% adequate to surplus, subsoil moisture 82% adequate to surplus. Days suitable to fieldwork was limited to 1 day due to tornadoes, rain, and flooding. Winter wheat jointed is at 4% behind the 5-year average. The crop was rated at 68% good to excellent. And that's this week's report of crop progress and condition across the state of Indiana. I am Nathaniel Warnsky for USDA NASS.
Our thanks go to the statisticians for their weekly updates of crop progress across the Midwest. University of Illinois Extension agronomist Giovani Preza and his emeritus colleague Emerson Nafziger have posted an article to the Crop Central website. It's also on our website at willag.org. Gio, thank you for being with us today. I really like the title of this article, Have We Missed the Best Planting Window for 2025? However, I'm wondering what really you and Emerson were thinking about.
Yeah, I think the title, Have We Missed the Best Planting Window for 2025? If you read it in early April, you might be thinking about what these guys are talking about, because we don't usually start planting until mid-April. Weather conditions were kind of warm and dry by mid-March that we've seen a few fields getting planted. And with the weather turning when we started April, right, I think it's a good time that we can kind of thinking about some of the considerations that we may need to keep in mind when we, wait for better soil and weather conditions before we decide when to start planting.
So farmers will be fully aware, as is the case this week, that cold weather can arrive in April. You and Emerson went through some data and background history. Can you give me some of that, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just a quick reminding that, the spring freeze probabilities remain relatively high early April, right? So we retrieved data from the 30-year normal, the past 30 years, to look at the probability of spring frost in Illinois. So we kind of looked at Belleville as kind of a southern Illinois, Champaign, central Illinois, and we looked at the weather at DeKalb as kind of a northern Illinois location. And overall, we still see that, there's still a 50% probability of a spring frost by the April 15 to 20 in Illinois. And we don't actually have to go back to kind of remember when that happened last. I think everybody will kind of remember that we saw a frost in 2021 that came about mid-April, right? So in 2021, conditions were so nice in the first 2 weeks of April that we saw a lot of planting happening, and then a cold front came and dropped temperatures below freezing for 10 days. And for those fields that were planted early and the crop had emerged, we saw some frost damage. And we even showed an example of a planting day trial that we had at Monmouth in that year where, especially for corn, we saw about a 12 bushels per acre yield penalty from a planting date on April 6 compared to when we planted on April 22. And that was because the frost damage came and we lost some stand on those fields.
I made note in the article that the data from 2021 showed the best planting date for soybeans was May 7th, though it was only a half a bushel better than the April 22 planting date.
And, that's kind of not unusual. I mean, we have years of data on planting date, and sometimes we've seen relatively very little yield response, especially with soybeans. So, if you think about soybeans, we probably lost some stand there due to the frost with the early planting, right? So the first planting was on April 2nd. But 2021 was also very good later in the season. And folks will remember that's when we set the new record for soybean yield in Illinois of about 64 bushels per acre. So we know that soybean, they do a better job in terms of compensating for low stand than corn. So I think that's why we think that yields were lower, but not very significantly compared to April 22nd and May 7th.
There is some information here I think farmers will need to be reminded of because planting dates have been pushed forward. You do talk a little bit about soil conditions and wet weather, cool weather combined, and what that means is it's related to planting. Cool temperatures, apparently not that big a deal, something of it, but cool and wet causes an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And when we start getting into April, I think we starting thinking about planting time, and there's an itchy to be out in the field and start field work and planning. And I think sometimes we may be overly fixated on having the crop planted by a specific calendar date. The idea here is that early planting is still good, right? We know the potential benefits of early planting, but there are other things that we need to keep in mind. And I think soil conditions at planting and after planting, it's very important to keep in mind. Cold soils by itself, it doesn't necessarily pose a threat to corn and soybean seeds, but the problem gets when the soil is cold and wet. Then we start having increased risk of seedling or seed damages by pathogen infection or insects feeding on the seeds. And we talked about the imbibitional chilling injury, which is when the soybeans emerge and they when they absorb water to emerge. If that water is cold, then that's when we see some of those chilling injury.
And finally, you ask at the end of this article for producers who have planted in March, early April too, I suppose, the first couple of days, to let you know what the condition of that crop looks like, what kind of issues they've had. How can they reach out to you?
We talked about, as a test plot, we did plant corn and soybeans at the Orr Research Center near Perry, right? We planted on March 13 and 26. We showed a couple of pictures from some of the seedlings that we dug out. And we know some other fields have been planted. And if farmers would like to reach out to us, they can email me or Emerson and let us know how the crop conditions are. We're interested to kind of learn more about, the resiliency of this when you think about modern genetics. We're interested to know how those fields are if they have any issue with emergence establishment or any frost injuries, because it's in the forecast to get below freezing, I think early next week. So again, just to let us know, I guess that will give us a better idea how early and how the corn and soybean can resist to those environments.
You can always email Emerson or Geo. You can do that. Look for them in the Crop Sciences webpage at the University of Illinois. Or you can go to willag.org, scroll down, and you'll find my name and email address, and I'll be glad to forward that on to the both of them. So it's easy enough to do. Geo, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Geo Preza Fontes is the extension agronomist at the University of Illinois. Joined us here on Illinois Public Media's Closing Market Report. Let's check now the weather forecast with Don Day. He's at Day Weather in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Hello, Don. Thanks for being with us. I tell you that we're behind in planting in the United States, but we're not, as we heard from the statisticians. Just 2% along for corn, and that's normal, but it was a really wild last 7 days. Can you tell me about it, please, and the weather?
Well, yeah, obviously we had all the flooding. We had some areas over the last week picking up well over 12 inches of rainfall across southeast Missouri, parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas, and as much as 3 to 6 inches above average for the week. Now, that's just for the week across the southern tier of Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. And we're going to take a while for those areas to dry out. Then, of course, we had the cold come in behind the system. We had snow all the way down to the Rio Grande this past weekend. So a lot of areas here to start the week have woken up to some frost and some very chilly temperatures. But the pattern is going to kind of take a pause here, catch its breath. And for a lot of the central United States, the next 5 to 7 days, there won't be a lot of weather. We will return to temperatures that will be warming up back to springtime levels.
It won't be drying temperatures unless there's wind with it. Is the wind still in play?
Well, the wind is going to be picking up with a little bit of this temperature change, but I tell you, it's not going to be a lot until maybe the weekend. Once we get into the weekend, I do see some winds picking up. We could see winds as much as 30 miles to 40 miles an hour as early as Friday and into the weekend. So help is on the way with the wind to dry some of that part of the U.S. out, but it's going to take a few days to get here.
What does next week look like? And then if you can give us a forecast maybe for the following week. I know it gets harder the further out you go.
Well, let's take us through the next Tuesday. The amount of rainfall is going to generally be light to moderate at most, mainly in the eastern side of the Corn Belt. Now, as we get into the second week, as we get into, let's say, approaching Easter weekend, and then the days after that is likely the next round of heavier precipitation. Nothing like what we just experienced, but getting back into a more active pattern of showers and thunderstorms. And I think that's something, but starting just before Easter weekend, probably all the way up to the 1st of May, is expect that 10-day period to likely be getting colder and wetter again.
Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Don Day is with Day Weather in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Joined us on this Tuesday edition of the Closing Market Report. It came to you from Illinois Public Media. We're online at willag.org. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason.